It didn't happen slowly. It didn't come with a warning sign, a polite notification, or a gentle whisper telling him to be careful. It happened in a single moment, the moment he lost control. The screen glowed in the dark room, numbers flashing red and green like a heartbeat that wasn't his. His palms were sweating, but he didn't notice. His jaw was tight, but he didn't feel it. All he could see was the chart, rising, falling, spiking like it had a mind of its own. Just minutes ago, he was confident, certain, almost proud of himself. He had studied the setup. He had watched the candles form. He told himself this trade was different. This one was calculated. This one was smart. But now the market was moving fast, too fast, and something inside him shifted. It wasn't strategy anymore. It wasn't logic. It was fear. At first, it was just a small drop. Nothing serious. He had seen pullbacks before. "It'll bounce," he whispered under his breath. He even smiled nervously, convincing himself that this was part of the plan. But then it dropped again and again. The profit he had been watching with excitement turned into a thin, fragile line barely above zero. His heart started racing. The room felt smaller. The air felt heavier. His finger hovered over the mouse. Close the trade? Hold it? Add more? Every option felt urgent. Every second felt louder than the last. The chart wasn't just numbers anymore. It felt personal, like it was attacking him, challenging him. He had promised himself he wouldn't panic like this again. He had rules, risk management, stop loss, a clear plan written in his notebook. But in this moment, those rules felt distant, weak, almost irrelevant. His emotions were screaming louder than his strategy. Just a little more, he thought. It has to reverse. He moved his stop loss further down. Just a little, just to give it room. That's what he told himself. He wasn't breaking his rules. He was adjusting, being flexible, being smart. But deep down, he knew the truth. This wasn't flexibility. This was fear disguised as confidence. The next candle slammed down hard, red, aggressive, unforgiving. The account balance dropped sharply. His stomach twisted. He could feel his pulse in his ears now. Every tick downward felt like a punch. The logical voice in his head was fading, drowned out by desperation. "It can't keep falling," he muttered. "Markets don't move like this forever." So he did the one thing he swore he would never do again. He doubled down. He added more money to the losing position, not because the setup improved, not because new data confirmed his bias, but because he needed to be right. And that was the moment. Not when the trade went against him, not when the candles turned red, but when his need to be right became stronger than his need to protect his capital. That was the exact second he lost control. The trade wasn't in charge anymore. The market wasn't in charge. His emotions were. Minutes later, the screen showed a number he had never imagined seeing. The loss was larger than any single loss he had ever taken, larger than his daily limit, larger than his pride could handle. He finally closed the trade, not strategically, not calmly, but out of pure emotional exhaustion. The silence that followed was unbearable. The market kept moving, indifferent, uncaring, but he just stared at the empty position. The damage was done. He leaned back in his chair, breathing heavily, feeling something worse than anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was the hollow realization that he hadn't been fighting the market. He had been fighting himself. The silence after the trade was louder than the chaos before it. The room felt still, but inside his chest, everything was shaking. The screen no longer flashed violently. The candles kept forming like nothing had happened, as if the market had already forgotten him. But he couldn't forget. The loss number was burned into his mind. He replayed every second leading up to it, the moment he moved the stop loss, the second he added more to the position, the lie he told himself when he said he was adjusting. It all felt so clear now, so obvious, and that clarity hurt more than the loss itself. He opened his trading journal, but his hands hesitated over the keyboard. What was he supposed to write? Broke rules? Traded emotionally, ignored risk management? The words felt small compared to the damage. This wasn't just a bad trade, it was a betrayal of his own system. Weeks of discipline undone in minutes of fear. He remembered the nights he stayed up studying charts, watching educational videos, promising himself he would trade like a professional. Professionals don't chase. Professionals don't double down out of desperation. Professionals accept losses. But he hadn't accepted it. He had fought it. And fighting the market is like fighting gravity. You don't win, you fall. A wave of frustration hit him. He slammed his fist lightly on the desk, not hard enough to break anything, just hard enough to release the pressure building inside him. "Why did I do that?" he whispered. He knew better. That's what made it worse. It wasn't ignorance. It wasn't lack of knowledge. It was lack of control. Knowledge told him to exit. Ego told him to stay. And ego won. He checked the chart again, even though he told himself he wouldn't. The market had started to stabilize. A small green candle appeared, then another. His heart twisted again. Of course, he thought bitterly, now it moves up. Regret flooded in, thick and suffocating. If he had just held a little longer, if he hadn't closed at the bottom, if he hadn't added so much size, the what-ifs attacked him from every direction. But deep down, he knew the truth. Even if the market reversed completely, it wouldn't change what happened. The mistake wasn't closing too early. The mistake was losing control in the first place. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. For the first time that night, he stopped blaming the market. He stopped blaming volatility, manipulation, bad luck. The market hadn't forced him to move his stop. It hadn't forced him to double his position. It hadn't forced him to ignore his risk limit. He did that. Every click, every decision, every emotional reaction. And that realization was both painful and powerful. Because if he caused the damage, that meant he could prevent it next time. But prevention wouldn't come from a new indicator, not from a better strategy, not from a secret setup. It would come from something much harder to master: himself. He looked back at the screen one last time before shutting the laptop. The market was still moving. It would move tomorrow. It would move next week. Opportunities would come and go. The question wasn't whether the market would give him another chance. The real question was whether he would be ready when it did, or whether, once again, he would lose control. He didn't open the charts the next morning. For the first time in months, he chose silence over volatility. No pre-market analysis, no scanning for setups, no social media gurus screaming about the next big move, just quiet. And in that quiet, something uncomfortable surfaced: honesty. He wasn't addicted to winning. He was addicted to being right. Every trade he took carried a hidden need to prove something, to himself, to the market, maybe even to people who didn't know he traded at all. The money mattered, yes, but the validation, that mattered more. And that was dangerous, because the market doesn't reward ego, it exposes it. He sat down with his journal again, this time without trying to soften the truth. He wrote slowly, deliberately, forcing himself to relive the moment he moved the stop-loss. Why did he do it? Fear of losing? Yes, but deeper than that, fear of accepting that he was wrong. Closing the trade at his planned stop would have meant admitting his analysis failed, admitting he misread the setup, admitting he's not as precise as he wants to believe. So instead of accepting a small, controlled loss, he chose uncertainty. He chose hope. Hope is not a strategy. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. The market didn't take control from him, he handed it over. The second he let emotions override structure, he gave away his edge. Trading isn't about predicting every move, it's about managing risk when you're wrong. And he had completely ignored that truth. He'd treated one trade like it was a life or death decision, when in reality it was just one of thousands he would take in his lifetime. That perspective changed something. He began reviewing his past trades, not just the losers, but the winners too, and he noticed a pattern that made his stomach tighten. Some of his biggest wins didn't come from perfect analysis. They came from disciplined execution, following the plan, respecting the stop, letting probabilities play out. The market had rewarded him most when he was calm, detached, almost boring. Not when he was intense, not when he was emotional, not when he felt invincible. Control didn't look dramatic. Control looked quiet. He realized something else. Losing control isn't loud at first. It doesn't feel reckless in the moment. It feels justified, logical, urgent. It whispers reasonable excuses. Just this once. It'll come back. You can't end the day red. Those thoughts don't sound dangerous, but they are, because they slowly move you away from your system and toward chaos. And chaos is expensive. By the end of the day, he wasn't thinking about recovering the loss anymore. He wasn't thinking about revenge trading. He wasn't even thinking about the market. He was thinking about identity. What kind of trader did he want to be? The emotional one who chases validation, or the disciplined one who protects capital like it's oxygen? He understood now that the real battle wasn't on the chart. It was internal, between patience and impulse, between humility and ego, between discipline and desperation. And the moment he lost control wasn't the end of his story. It was the wake-up call, the kind that hurts enough to force change, if he's brave enough to accept it. He came back to the charts 3 days later, not with excitement, not with hunger, but with intention. There was no rush in his movements this time, no adrenaline in his pulse, just a quiet awareness that the market did not owe him anything. The loss was still there in his account history, staring back at him like a scar, but instead of trying to erase it, he decided to study it. He didn't start by looking for a trade. He started by rewriting his rules. Not the technical ones, not the entry criteria or the indicators. Those were fine. The real problem wasn't the strategy. It was the space between stimulus and response, the moment where emotion had taken over logic. So he created new rules, personal ones. If his heart rate spiked, he would step away. If he felt the urge to make it back, he would close the platform. If he moved a stop loss once, the trade would be closed immediately, no exceptions. Simple rules, brutal rules, rules designed to protect him from himself. Because he finally understood something most traders learn the hard way. The market is neutral. It doesn't attack you, it doesn't reward you, it simply moves. The only thing that turns movement into pain is the story you attach to it. He had attached pride, fear, identity, and self-worth to a fluctuating line on a screen. That was never going to end well. His next trade came a week later. It was small, smaller than usual, intentionally small. When he entered, he felt the familiar tension creep in, that subtle tightening in his chest as price ticked up and down. But this time he noticed it. He didn't become it. There was a difference. The trade moved slightly against him, not dramatically, just enough to test his patience. The old voice whispered, "Maybe adjust it." The old reflex twitched in his fingers, but he didn't move. He watched. He breathed. He let the stop loss sit exactly where he planned it. Minutes later, the market hit his stop, a small, controlled loss. The platform made a soft notification sound, and that was it. No explosion, no collapse, no account destruction, just a minor loss, exactly as planned. And something unexpected happened. He felt calm. There was no anger, no shame, no desperate need to jump back in. For the first time, a loss didn't feel like failure. It felt professional. It felt clean. He had executed the plan perfectly. The outcome didn't matter as much as the process. That was the shift. Control wasn't about forcing wins. It was about accepting losses without losing yourself. Over the next few weeks, he focused less on profit and more on consistency. Some days were green, some days were red, but none of them were chaotic. None of them were emotional spirals. The dramatic swings in his account began to smooth out. So did the dramatic swings in his mindset. He realized that the moment he had lost control wasn't his worst trading day. It was the most important one. Because without that painful collapse, he would have continued believing he was disciplined when he really wasn't. He would have kept confusing intensity with skill. He would have kept letting ego sit in the driver's seat. Now, when he looked at the charts, he didn't see a battlefield anymore. He saw probabilities. He saw risk. He saw opportunity, but only within limits. And deep down, he knew something had fundamentally changed. The market could still move violently,
Trades could still fail, losses would still happen, but the next time volatility tried to shake him, it wouldn't take his control with it. Months later, the charts still looked the same. Candles still formed, news still shocked the market, sudden spikes still tested patience. Nothing about the external world of trading had changed, but internally, everything was different. He no longer sat at his desk trying to predict every move. He no longer felt the need to catch the top or bottom of a trend. He wasn't chasing perfection, he was executing process. The excitement that once fueled his trades had been replaced with something quieter: discipline. And discipline, he realized, doesn't feel powerful in the moment. It feels almost boring. But boring is sustainable. There were still losing days, there always would be, but a losing day no longer spiraled into a losing week. A red trade no longer turned into revenge trading. When the market hit his stop, he accepted it instantly. No negotiation, no second guessing, just execution. The stop loss wasn't an enemy anymore, it was protection, a boundary, a reminder that survival comes before success. And slowly, something else began to grow. Confidence. Not the loud, ego-driven confidence that demands to be right, but quiet confidence, the kind that builds when you follow your rules even when it's uncomfortable. He trusted himself more now, not because he always won, but because he knew he wouldn't sabotage himself. One afternoon, volatility surged again. A massive move hit the market out of nowhere. Social media exploded. Traders were panicking. Charts were moving aggressively in both directions. Months ago, this kind of movement would have triggered him. His heart would race. His mind would scream for action. He would feel that familiar pressure. Don't miss it. Don't be left behind. This is your chance. He watched it unfold calmly. He waited for his setup. And when it didn't appear, he did nothing. That was the difference. Not every opportunity is yours. Not every move requires participation. Control isn't about dominating the market, it's about mastering your response to it. As the volatility slowed and the noise faded, he leaned back in his chair, not exhausted, not defeated, but steady. He understood now that the moment he once thought defined his failure was actually the moment that defined his growth. The day he lost control was the day he realized he needed it. The trade that wiped out his confidence forced him to rebuild it properly. The pain that once felt unbearable became the foundation for discipline, and the silence after that devastating loss became the space where he finally learned the truth. The market doesn't decide who succeeds. Your ability to stay in control does. And this time, no matter how wild the charts become, he won't lose it again.